We may take a couple of questions, or even you can go longer.
No. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Sato Kan, and I try to don't to disturb your digestion. No. I want to keep you awake. So I have 27 slides, and within 20 minutes, it means that I have 44 seconds per slide. Okay. So please keep in touch. Okay. Now I'm talking about the role of semi-official community-based organization in social development. And that is a picture of 1950s, 40s, 50s in Japan, so 60 years back, the rural development experience. And then this is what I'm talking about. Now, experience from East Asia, that is the Tori just mentioned, that East Asia, not only the China, Korea, Japan, but including Southeast Asia. I think community-based organization is important, but in East Asia, semi-official community-based organization is a unique history of doing that. And today I talk about the Japanese experience of post-war Japan, post-war period, 1940s, 50s, 60s. And Korea has the same kind of the semi-official government mechanism in Semarundon. I think that some of you already know it, and also some of our colleagues can explain later. And in Indonesia, I have a little knowledge about, but you have the RT, this is official. But for example, Posyandu, mother and health care, that is not 100% under the government. It's semi-official organization. So I think the semi-official organization, community-based organization, have some unique feature in East Asia. So my last comment on that is, let's do some joint study on this. Okay, before that, that was the Japanese case, post-war experience in Japan. And then we experienced 1970s, 80s, rapid economic growth. So everybody want to know what happened in the 1970s, 80s. Already some argument that well, our policy is good and we're diligent people and a high level education like that. But I think before that, 1945 was the year of ended the war. And 1964, that was a kind of beginning of the rapid economic growth. So during this 20 years' time, we had a rural development, and that was based on semi-official community-based organizations. So a feature of LIP, the Livelihood Improvement Movement, Livelihood Improvement Practice Movement, we call it the LIP. And then that was government has the policy, and also the government official act as a facilitator, but it's not in line with government apparatus. It's a community-based organization. And then there was a success in the kind of the poverty eradication from the zero after the end of the war, and that was unplanned integrated rural development. It's not planned from the beginning, but as a kind of the amalgamation of the small activities, it became a kind of integrated rural development. Now the right-hand side, that was a picture of Tokyo, not Hiroshima or Nagasaki. The beginning of 1945, it's summer of 1945, all over the raid of the US raid, everything was burnt out. That was a starting point. And the left-hand side, this was a picture of rural household in Japan at that time. Now at that time, the Japanese government had an urgent issue. That was food security and a reconstruction of the country, then accommodation of the people. We had the colony outside Japan, and then 6 million people came back. At that time, our population was 60 million. It means a 10% sudden increase of the population. So that was the food urgent issue, but the Japanese government cannot do anything by their own because we are occupied by the United States. So that was induced reform by the United States. That is a little bit similar to today's developing countries' situation, that donors want to do something, and if the country receiving those aid, if they are doing in line with the donor's intention, then they can get some aid. Now, the induced reform was democratization. So United States believe in that democratization should be in Japan. And then that was in line of this policy. Then we started agricultural extension system. That was an exact copy of US extension system. Before the war, we didn't have this kind of the extension system. Okay? Now, the point is that we had two kinds of extension workers. One is agriculture extension worker, who are almost male, and then they are dealing with agricultural technique to farmers. But the other one is livelihood improvement extension worker. Those are women, and their main target was women, especially young wives in rural area. The motivation is to democratize and empower women. Okay? Now, we call it LIP approach. This facilitator, these LIP workers, they are facilitators. They are government official. But still, they are doing something special. But it's very important thing is that they are taught, those facilitators are taught, do not teach anything. Just let the people think about their problem. That was the system. I just skip. And those are the LIP workers. They are moving around by bicycle and visited the field and houses and listening to the women's voice. One of the problems at that time was the working condition in kitchen. There are a lot of problems. This is the traditional Japanese cooking stove. Without chimney, the ventilation was so bad, and the thermal efficiency is so bad. So we need a lot of the firewood there. So collecting firewood is a job for women. Another thing is water fetching. It's all over the world, same. I think some of the Southeast Asian countries have still same problem in rural area. And then this is a problem also. And then another thing is the heavy burden of agricultural work for women. So that picture shows the rice planting. And this boy or girl, she or he is tied in the basket because nobody can take care of him. Everybody should go to the field. So that kind of situation is very worrisome by the mothers. And then also, when they notice that there was some nutritious problem or some clothing problem, LIP workers try to encourage them, I mean the rural women, to make up a group and to make some joint work to improve their daily life. And it's also a goal to add some more the nutrition. They're raising the goats and get some milk from it. Also, they are raising some hens, and they got some eggs. And this egg saving is not only taking, but selling this, and then they got some money, and they use this money for the improvement. And then communal cooking and communal nursery. During busy agriculture time, nobody can take care of children, so they collect ideas. They gather those children, one of the community hall or one temple or shrine, and then some non-agricultural working women can take care of them. Or communal, the cooking is also the same. Instead of individual women prepare for those the family members, they collect 10, 20 members, and every morning they brought some the ingredient, and only one woman can cook for every 10, 20 household. So in doing this, the other women can concentrate on agricultural work. And also, those kind of activities, that is government initiated, but government at that time has no money. And fortunately or unfortunately, at that time there was no international NGO. So the people should get their fund by themselves. How? They have a lot of activities. It's a kind of the tanomoshi as Japanese word for yayasan or arisan in Indonesia. It's the rotating credit association, or egg saving, or goat bank, whatever. They're trying to get some money for their own activity. And the LIP worker, as a facilitator, they cannot afford money, but they're trying to facilitate this kind of activity. Now, I came quick last 20 years. Now, this is the year 64. After 20 years, Japan became a member of OECD, became a full member of IMF, and that year was the first Tokyo Olympic game. That was the first Olympic game outside Europe and America. And at the year, our mortality rate became lower than that of United States. It means we exceed the level of the mortality rate, we exceeded USA. So this 20 years was the experience of semi-official community-based organization. Now, argumented like that. Well, we talk about top-down and the bottom-up, but I think the semi-official CBOs, they have kind of the flexibility, not directed by the government, but some policy is shown by the government. But the community itself has the decision to what kind of the strategies they can take. So that's very important, I think. And this picture shows it's a kind of community cleaning day of the village. So once a month, the Women's Association, they decided to do a whole village cleaning. And then at that day, public health office can come to help them. Not but the other side. Not public health office decided and order the people to do that. No. If there is a community who are doing by themselves, then they can come and help. If there's no initiative from the community side, public health office cannot do anything. That kind of the activity, I call it a synergetic relation. It means that it's not the order. It's not just the request. But if one side do something, the other side will reply. And receiving this reply, the other side did something more. And then receiving this reply, then the other side doing some more. That kind of relation is very important. And to build up the good relation between government apparatus and people's organization, this kind of the synergetic relation is very important, I think. And then the feedback mechanism is very important. Once the government decided the policy, and then usually the government order, that's all. But important thing is that how to feedback what's happening on in the ground. So we had a very interesting case is a kind of the competition. And this is the central government. They decided a policy, and the prefecture government, we have 47 prefecture government, and they have the extension center. There are the deep workers and the agriculture extension worker. They did something, but they didn't do that exactly what the central government ordered. They adjust by themselves according to their local situation, culture, economic situation, and social situation. Then there are some kind of the contest or kind of reporting system. And then this group have the kind of the competition in the extension center. And then if there is a good one, they can go to the kind of the upper class competition in prefecture capital. And then they got first one, then they can go to Tokyo to present this. And then in this central government level, they have presented their experience, then policy makers can listen to them. Then policy maker decided next year's plan. So this mechanism of the feedback, it helps the totally United States system to adjust, domesticate to Japanese system. Now, weakness of official and local groups, I think. Official government organization. Before the war, Japan has a kind of the official government organization in the neighborhood area. But that kind of the organization, less initiative from the local people, easily politicized by local elite, difficult to keep after government change. On the other hand, totally local groups. There are a lot of local groups, or sometimes in developing countries, some kind of CBO organized or sponsored by NGO. But those are the lack of sustainable funding after donor withdrawal, easily confiscated by English-speaking elite, those kind of things. So some feature of semi-official community groups, I think I want to put 3 points. First, as semi-official CBO gave second-class citizens, that is women at that time in Japan, can give some voice for those people or left behind people. That is one thing. Second thing is that they are coming together and doing something together. And they are encouraged by themselves. And also they are encouraged by the authorization of the government officials, such as LIP workers. So they have some kind of confidence by themselves. Thirdly, the experience, oh no. Thirdly, that this is the one, and the second one I skipped. Yeah, that's right. Thirdly, yes. The authorization of government is very important. It's not totally independent from the government. The government apparatus knows what they are doing. And then if there's something needed, government can extend their hand. So these kind of things, as a result, after 60 years, now in Japanese rural area, there are a lot of these kind of LIP groups. They are now their 80s and 90s, those old women. But they're still active as a leader of local kind of development. Now, my proposal of the joint study is, I think in Semaurundon or some the Posyandu in Indonesia or some other example are fluent, I think. They are fluent there. So let's do some kind of the joint comparative study about semi-official CBOs. And so what we should think is how it happens, how it's financed, who initiate, and who facilitate, way of governance, what is the rule of governance, a social capital making or empowerment process, or relation with government administration. Especially, for example, some South Asian countries such as Bangladesh, there are a lot of CBOs supported by the NGO. They are a kind of parallel to the government apparatus. Sometimes they are competing each other. But that is not healthy, I think. So for this, we can kind of the comparative study, and we can find some new aspect for the development. I'm sorry. Oh, come back? Can I come back? Press back? No. Oh, no. Okay. Sorry for that. Anyway, the last slide is very important. Yeah. This is the community group, 1950s. That Japanese people are famous for punctuality. But at that time, no, it was not. In rural area, everybody cannot come on time for the community meeting. So this slogan says, just keep a time. It should be the starting point for the modernization. So keep your time punctually. I hope I did it. Thank you very much.
Is there any question or comment on this presentation? Otherwise, I have yeah.
No, it's very interesting. I haven't heard of this. Is this a model Japan tried to export to other countries through its aid program?
That's the question actually I was going to
Yes,
ask.
yes.
So you mentioned the Semaurundon a couple of times.
Yes.
Is there any studies saying that movement affect Korea's Semaur movement? And my question also directs my colleagues, Korean colleagues. Do you have any reference? Semaurundon is affected by Japanese movement.
Not that I know. But actually, some studies show instead of the Japanese influence, some of the studies talk about the 4-H movement in Europe, England, time. That one that probably affected, influenced the early stage of the rural movement, like the community movement.
That's right. That's right.
Can I add a question to that? I wanted to ask, how did the development thinking shift? Because Malaysia went through almost the same time in the pre-1970s, where community development was very central with the kind of auxiliary workers for the rural,
please use the microphone.
Actually, there's been a lot of studies about the Japanese institutional development. One of the book title, Imitation and Innovations, for example, like Japan has been known, that's been for a very successful way of their domestication of a foreign system into, right? Sounds like this is pretty similar, like it's the first democratization since the World War II, probably under the goal of the democratizing the country. But quite interesting that you explained the woman into that system. However, when a country accepts the foreign institution and try to sort of Japanize the U.S. system, right? Then you have to work with some local values and local experiences. How those local, the institution and local experience have been sort of, part of this whole process. I would like to know. Okay.
Thank you, Asha. A lot of question. First of all, is Japan making use of this experience for our ODA? Well, it's true that we intentionally try to do it last 20 years, something like that. But it's not direct one. Well, we are trying to integrate this kind of the approach in rural development or public health activities, so that we are trying to integrate this kind of the notion, especially the Kaizen. Kaizen is an improvement in Japanese. And Kaizen is very famous on Toyota production system. The same. So the improvement itself at the same notion that trying to not to bring totally new idea, try to bring totally new machine like that, but using and utilize existing resources. So that is the same. So we are trying to integrate this kind of notion to our rural, especially social development. Secondly, 4-H, that's right. So this the picture of the agricultural extension system. There are 3 jobs for those extension system. One is agriculture extension worker for male farmers. The second is lip worker for women. The third is 4-H for young people in rural area. So actually the 4-H is under the influence of US Department of Agriculture. They are brought in. And we utilize and we domesticate this one. And thirdly, that the role of women, that's true. Because Japanese rural area is so conservative and kind of the feudalistic, so-called, so the old norm still exists there. But there are a lot of people who noticed that it should be changed or who wanted to change. The rural women themselves. And then if there is some kind of potential, they utilize the outside pressure because we are occupied. And then US are there, so we cannot resist this. So those people who are trying to empower women, they could use this pressure for their own sake. That was the process of changing norms of course, there are some resistance from the elder people or elder women because in each village, there are women's association. The member are the housewife of each house. It means they are mother-in-laws. But the lip worker, they are trying to concentrate on young wives. So there are kind of the conflict of interest by the mother-in-law and young wives. So lip worker try to console those elderly people and elder women. We are doing this and this, and it's not against your value or whatever. So this kind of maneuver still that exists. And you said something.
Okay, we can continue
yeah.
later with a more integrated form.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for this presentation. And we have second one, Dr. Soti King.
Hello, so my name is Soti Kieng. You can call me Soti. I'm currently based in Melbourne, Australia, but CDI is where my full-time job is. I also teach part-time at the Royal University of Phnom Penh, a public leading institute in terms of development studies. And I'll try to follow the Japanese in terms of punctuality. So I'm going to talk about this evidence of emergence of social enterprises in Cambodia by covering these main 4 themes with some backgrounds of the major development issues that we have faced, the role of NGOs in this process of development, and some of the cases of emergence of social enterprise and how these have implications on the overall shifting paradigm of development in Cambodia, but perhaps following the trend in the region. So this is quite well known, but it would be a shame not to talk about it. Since the early 1990s, with the peace accord in place, thanks to international intervention, Cambodia has received a lot of development assistance. And a lot of scholars, a lot of researchers have labeled this process as aid, but also not just aid, but donor dependence. What this brings as an issue is that it has negative correlation toward institution. And just like other countries that are resource rich, it encourages rent-seeking and corruptions and so on. In Cambodia, specifically linking to the role of NGOs, I'm going to talk about more later, this dependence on aid contributes at least to 2 major issues: upward accountability and submissiveness of NGOs, of course, toward donors and foreign counterparts. And we were just talking about values, and in this case, reconciliation between 2 shifting values or paradigms: the Westerns, or now increasingly Eastern concepts and agenda of development versus the local cultural, political, and social context. As I said, with traditionally lack of indigenous civil society and cultural philanthropy in the countries, suddenly, after 1990s, there's a huge growth of NGOs. And I want to specify this, stress this, that it's not really the case of Sato's San of community-based. This is NGOs mainly established by donors or in responding to availability of fundings from abroad. And in other words, it's not a gradual scaling up of democratic space. The intention is the same, Western value of bringing democracy, human rights, and so on to the country, but it's not a natural scaling up of grassroots or community-based organizations or charities. And with the sheer numbers of NGOs in the country, they have to compete more and more for less funding resources, while donors and international partners demand for more visible short-term impacts. Some people call these groups of civil society as movement without citizens. Again, I think I have talked about this already, but just to illustrate how large this NGO sector is, they are responsible for at least 20% of the total official development assistance to the country. Their numbers have increased from less than 100 to almost 3,000 now, according to official figure, 1,014 according to Ministry of Interior figure. So this competition, in theory, is challenging because it affects the ability to acquire and maintain resources, which in turn affects organizational survival. And the trends of official development assistance has affected these survival strategies because internationally they're shifting priorities to other countries, to more toward government agencies and less on NGOs. So in response to this, NGOs diversify their funding sources. And if you look at these trends, share of earned income, share of total funding, looking at earned income or commercial activities, at least 1 in 5 NGOs in Cambodia engage in 1 or more commercial activities. And the decrease, if you look at a trend, 5-year trend from 2011 to 2016, there's a huge increase of the larger NGOs that depend 50% or more on commercial incomes. Beyond sustainability, but also they're looking for locally available resources. And in this process, varieties of organizational forms have emerged. And within this varieties of organizational form, the two or one groups that I want to focus the talk on today is social enterprise or social entrepreneurial organizations. This continuum might illustrate the various types of organizational form that we can situate. But again, of our discussion today, NGOs having income generation activity and social enterprise. Although the traditional, more traditional form of such organization are cooperatives. But that's beyond the discussion today. According to literature, a social enterprise is a not-for-profit or for-profit venture that created to solve social or environmental problems. It is driven by two main forces: the use of innovative approach or the market means to achieve social change, and resourcefulness in sustaining sustainability. In Cambodia, if you look at the activities of this social entrepreneurial organization, you can see that they're focusing on tourism and hospitality, education, agriculture, and microcredit. Some other major activities of their engagement. So some of the picture in vocational training for disadvantaged youth, women, restaurants for training disadvantaged youth across the country. These are some of the cases. Some are engaged in environmental, solving environmental problems, such as the sustainable green fuel enterprise that made charcoal from coconut shell. 1001 fountains solve the lack of clean water across the country through innovative local approach. Cambodia Knits is another emerging social enterprise. For the Smile of the Children, PSE, engaging successfully in training disadvantaged youth from garbage sites. And Hakria Seda or Seda Enterprise, they are promoting community-based organization in rice sector. So Regional study have shown that Cambodia, comparing to the region, has the most active social enterprise sector. And further, this World Bank study concluded that the country has a lot of potential to support social entrepreneurs to be successful. A report by a largest umbrella organization, CCC, Cooperation Committee for Cambodia, stated that there's a shift towards social enterprise programs as a new, more sustainable development model. So, what does this all means? First, beyond financial motivation, this emergence of social enterprise may mean a break away from authority or to break up perceived constraint. In other words, it's a process for freedom or emancipatory, where social entrepreneurs aim to fulfill desire for freedom and independence from conventional structure of authority. And by authority here, it implies both to donor and to relationship with a local authority and a national government agency. This is after almost 3 decades of civil society organization, a critical period for NGO development. Because it started mainly from donor dependence to more organizational autonomy and sustainability. There's also evidence of shifting accountability from top down to more bottom up, although this doesn't really show the strong foundation of community-based development. And again, there's a changes relationship between the local NGOs and international donors and development partners. Some say this process is the process of undoing the patronage view of what international and local development is about. In a way, it's also signify a new version of Cambodian not-for-profit organizations. And Sato used the word domestication. Scholars on Cambodia use the word Cambodianization and hybridization of civil society sector. Cambodianization because now these organizations, development organizations, depend more on local funding sources and engage more of the local people. Hybridization because of the different mixture of value, economic and development or environmental value. So the question whether Cambodia is starting to shed the fetters of foreign domination, although there are many cases where these social enterprises are still founded or strongly supported by foreign actors. And within this context happening now while I'm out of the country, that NGOs are being or have been cracked down and usually associated with the opposition. What is the role that social enterprise can contribute to civil society building? So I'll end my presentation here, and I'll look forward to receiving any comments or discussion from you.
Thank you very much for short talk, which helps us to make up for the time we lost. So I will take one quick question. If you have any question about for Soti, then we yep. Yeah. Yep. I will take one. We can do it later. Yeah.
You said you're talking about social enterprises, and they have transformed from donor dependent to organizational autonomy or something like that. Do the government allow social enterprises to work in all sectors, or there are some categories that, for example, say in some countries they don't allow social organizations to come in education or health or whatever. So what is it?
In this case, there's no real constraint on social enterprise beyond the lack of legal framework that support or legalize social enterprise. In other words, they can exist in either not-for-profit as an NGO or for-profit. There's no real concrete legal form to support social enterprise. But again, to answer your question, there's no barrier of sectors for social enterprise to engage, and specifically they exist both in health and education sector. For NGO, though, I may just add briefly, you would see more of them active in non-sensitive sectors, and for those that are active in human rights, democracy, land grabbing, illegal mining and logging, fishery, then they're more alienated and cracked down.
Okay, thank you. Then thank you for this talk. Then we have the third presentation, Dr. Vu Nu Binh from Vietnam.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity that I'm here to be with you. So you see more or less the picture of Vietnam nowadays, the Communist Party, like China, red flag, you know, the star, the hamper, big, and then etc. And then you have below, you have the long line of students also, standing for the language test. For career. So even they are graduate from the university, but they have no job, so they like to go out of the country for work, for job. And one of the countries they like is Korea, Japan. So it is language test for career. So I just put question mark here. Yes, Vietnam is moving, is different now. So in the past, about 3 decades ago, Vietnam was considered as a country, planning economy, command economy. But now it's moving from the command economy, planning economy to the market economy. And to be a market economy, Vietnam has to be has to be clear by many countries who are which are member of the WTO. So Vietnam joined WTO in 2008. But many countries have not agreed that Vietnam is a market economy, so Vietnam is still in the process of negotiation. And law governed state. So Vietnam is a one-party country. That means one party only to empower, no more other parties. In China, you have more parties besides the Communist Party. I don't know if it is this is like a Communist Party, but you have more parties. But Vietnam has one party only. And Vietnam and civil society is growing. More, even the party doesn't want, but still growing. So in my paper, I present the country context. Here it means that from the 8 MDG goals to the 17 MDG goals, and how Vietnam is the process. And then also Vietnam has, different from Cambodia, Vietnam has become development partner as recognized by other countries. So from 2013, Vietnam is no more having CG meeting, consultative group meeting. So it means all donors come to Vietnam to discuss how they should support Vietnam in the future, but now no more. So they come to Vietnam as a partner to discuss with Vietnam how to help Vietnam, but as a partner, not as a partner, but not as a receiver anymore. So the question is, in the process of development, there will be more inequality or less inequality. Sorry, so it is the state actor. Sorry, it's in Vietnamese. So you see the yellow above it, we call it political system. Political system. So in other countries, except Vietnam, China, or Laos, you have the state actors. But in Vietnam, state actors are just some only, not in the whole political system. So political system here means that one column is Communist Party, the first column, Communist Party. How many members are there in the Communist Party? So there is a long history, and already 70 years already. And now about 4 million members of the Communist Party of Vietnam. So if you like to become someone in the system, you have to be a party member. In the past, if you like to become, you like to go abroad for PhD, then you have to be a party member, for example. But now it's not no more, but you have to be a party member to do whatever in government position. And then the second sector is, that is communist, and then state sector. State sector here means that like other country, you have the government, you have National Assembly, you have the court system. And then in addition to the court, you have something which is not in other countries, so that's prosecution along with the court. So in other country, prosecution is under the Ministry of Justice, or it is a part of the government. But here in Vietnam, it is independent from the government. It is independent from the court. So along, that is, they learned from the Soviet model in the past. And then the third column is about the social mass organization. So in Vietnam, not only NGO, but there are also like the Fatherland Front, the Vietnam Women Union, Vietnam Youth Union, the Peasant Association, for example. So these are the hands of the Communist Party. So they control the people, through those organizations. They are funded by the government. The staff are funded by the government. So these are the three. So we call them the state, not state, the political system, not the state actor, but political system. And then in Vietnam, we also have the non-state actor. So non-state actor means the NGOs or civil society, which are growing more and more. Very weak, still very weak. Not like Cambodia, but still growing. And then the third one, also strong, but not so strong like now, but still strong. So that is development partners. I mean the bilateral donors and the embassies, etc. Like in Cambodia, a lot of donors helping the country. They are fewer now, phasing out now, but still very important for the country because, the situation of the country. That is the history of Vietnam. So Vietnam joined the UN exactly 40 years ago. And then Vietnam launched the reform also 30 years ago. So reform means to change, to renovate the system, not to doing the same thing, but to renovate, to do different way. Not only economically, but also politically, but less politically, but more economically. And very important for Vietnam is to normalize the relationship with the United States. And then become ASEAN member. And then start to have the SDGs to the year 2000. So Vietnam has developed and then has achieved a lot, especially in the poverty reduction, in education, and in gender equality. And then Vietnam joined the World Trade Organization in 2007. So that is very important for Vietnam. So if Vietnam like to develop, have to be friends, and has to be with US, has to be with ASEAN, and also with other countries within the WTO framework. And Vietnam was recognized as a lower middle income country in 2008. And it joined the ASEAN Economic Community and start to have the sustainable development goals. And very important for Vietnam, if Vietnam is trying to be in the 12 country negotiating among each other, especially with the US. So the US has withdrawn, but Vietnam is still hoping that one day the USA is coming back. So that's why 11 countries are still negotiating. And Vietnam, the goal for Vietnam is to become an industrialized country by the year 2020. So that is Vietnam in the past, but now at present, you have more high-rise buildings in the country, in the city, in other cities as well, but more in Hanoi. And Ho Chi Minh City have high-rise building. Yes, I said there have been some achievement, especially in gender equality, reproduction, and education. So things are moving. Yeah, Vietnam is within the ASEAN context. So it seems there is no choice. Vietnam has to be part of the ASEAN. ASEAN economic integration. So not only economic, but also national defense and security, etc. Vietnam is, I think, with other countries in the region here, is negotiating for RCEP. So RCEP, that is the bloc of 10 ASEAN countries and 6 other partners, India, Australia, New Zealand, yeah, 6 others. So 10 plus 6. And on APEC also as well. Yeah, so that is we are watching, you know, the two struggling with each other. But the two, you know, it seems very powerful and very, you know, have equal strength nowadays. And Vietnam is has committed to be a part of the Belt and Road. I was in Shanghai 10 days ago to be in a discussion with the Shanghai University to discuss the One Belt, One Road, you know, for the university. But Vietnam is sure to be part of the process. Yes, there are 65 countries to be part of the One Belt, One Road. So Vietnam is one of the 65. India is not happy. India is really reluctant. It's not, you know, there was big conference in Beijing, high-level conference or dialogue in Beijing in May, and all ASEAN countries sent delegation to the Beijing platform, high-level platform, discussing One Belt, One Road. So 7 of them are headed by the president or prime minister, the top leader of the country. 3 are headed by minister only. But India only sent, you know, businessmen, but not government officials. So you see the attitude, different attitudes of the people in the region or in other countries around China on the One Belt, One Road. Yes, somehow in Japan and in, I think in Malaysia, somehow in Korea also, there were some protests against RCEP, against TPP also. Vietnam has no, because I think because of the strong control of the government. So the government is in favor of RCEP. The government is in favor of TPP. There's no protest at all. So you see, RCEP is without the United States. The other one is TPP is without China. Vietnam is within both. So the question from us is, are there any benefits for the poor people, for the people? So the idea is for Vietnam is by the year 2035, Vietnam will become a rich country, rich country, democratic country, with equality. So who have benefits from the process of development? Of course, not ethnic minority. Of course, they have, but less than other people. Ethnic minority have less than women, children, older person, people with disability, migrant workers, migrant. The idea is no one to be left behind. That is the motto. I just focus on the 2 issues. That is labor migration, because many of you here are the country receiving labor migration from Vietnam. So I think number 1, Malaysia. Number 2 is Korea. Number 3 should be Taiwan. Number 4, I think, should be China. So many people are still going to all those countries. So each year, normally the migrant worker sent back to Vietnam $2 billion. $2 billion means more than less than the ODA. Less than the ODA. Less or more than the ODA, I'm not sure, but very important for Vietnam. And then remittances from other countries back to Vietnam is about 12 billion. So Vietnam has been one of the top countries in Asia. So ranking after only the Philippines, China, and India. And we hope that this year is more remittances for Vietnam. So Vietnam has sent about 500,000 people. So Vietnam is more or less like the Philippines. Philippines, I think, 10 million. Vietnam is 500,000 to other countries, 50 countries. And every year, Vietnam sends about 100,000 migrant workers. But that is irregular workers, contract worker. But without contract or undocumented, we don't know how many. And more now they go to China as migrant workers. And even now they start to go to Laos and Cambodia as well for work. And of course, Thailand as well. And under contract, they go to South Korea, they go to Japan, they go to Malaysia. Yes? And Korea is not happy. It has stopped, no, I think almost stopped the program of receiving migrant workers from Vietnam because 40%, you know, they just quit the job, and then arrive at the airport, they just quit the job, quit the team, and they join other people. So that is a picture now about the Vietnam. And marriage migration is also one of the key features of Vietnam. So Vietnam also sent a lot of marriage migrants to Malaysia. Thank you. China, of course, China number one, I think. No figure, no statistic, but China should be number one. China, I think, should be 700,000 Vietnamese women in China as wives. Korea, let me see, 50,000. Taiwan, 100,000. Malaysia, I'm not sure, I don't have data, but there is data. Oh, that is the culture, still strong. So the culture is strong in Asian countries, especially China, of course, and Japan and Korea, of course, Vietnam. So the four virtues. And then 3 obediences. So these are the major countries for labor exporting from Vietnam. Thank you. Of course, it links with trafficking. Okay, so that is who are going out of the country as migrant workers. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much. I will be happy to receive the answers.
Okay, so I think we better move to the last presentation. Then we have because we are now running late.
Okay, thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my work titled The Politics of Foreign Aid and Development of the Private Sector, a Case of the Republic of Korea. I'm the last presenter of the last session for today, so my challenge is to make you awake throughout my presentation, which could be very hard. I'll just briefly talk about how I got interested in this topic. Actually, I've been studying about slow development, poverty, and foreign aid. And I have conducted some comparative researches on countries in Africa and South Korea. As I think more and study more about this topic, I have realized that it's not necessarily foreign aid, but actually unemployment, which has been highlighted by Dr. Vu Nak Min in the previous presentation. And I also realized that in many countries in Africa, there's no sizable, sound local business groups. So I got interested in these questions, which is how, in spite of heavy inflow of aid, did local business in Korea grow? And some of them actually developed into Jaebol, a family-owned big businesses. What was the impact of aid in this whole process of development of local businesses in Korea? And in this morning, actually, Professor Cox talked about the the structural change, the importance of structural change. Maybe that could be, he suggested, maybe that could be one of the factors that explain this relatively low level of participation in higher education level. And I just thought about this when I was hearing the presentation, that actually in the case of Korea, I think that it was the local private firms that actually took a very active role in making Korea's economy transform. So Korean economy began with labor intensive, and it moved to heavy industrialization, and now it's IT sector. So it continued to develop and transform the economic structure. It's not just the size, but the quality of economy developed. So maybe that explains why Korea has very high participation in higher education level. So the thing is, like, I think that the local firms are very important in explaining all this issue of unemployment, maybe aid effectiveness, and this poverty problem. So in this paper, I studied the case of Korea because it's a different case from most of other heavy recipient countries. So I examined the early periods of Korea, which is Seungman-Rhee and Park regimes, when Korea was heavily dependent on foreign aid. So my arguments are quite simple, actually, that the aid actually played a positive role in the growth of local private sector in the case of Korea, and the role of state was very important in this whole process. So I'll begin with Seungman-Rhee era. In this paper, I focused on politics, very naturally because I'm trained political scientist. So I show that there was political alliance between government and local businesses, which was a key factor explaining government support for development of the local private sector. Actually, in the case of Seungman-Rhee regime, there was very low political support within Korea. So President Rhee was very in need of political ally, and saw local business groups as his very important political ally. So he actually implemented a series of pro-business policies. But Korea was very poor, so it was colonized by Japan, and the colony ended in 1945, and there was a war during his regime, so it was very poor, one of the poorest countries in the world, actually. So he had this goal and policies to develop local private sector, but it was one thing to have this kind of vision, and another to have capacity to implement his policy. And actually these resources came from foreign aid. Throughout the Rhee era, Korea was very dependent on foreign aid. And actually, if we think, based on the ODA GNP per capita level, Korea was the single largest recipient of the US aid throughout the Cold War era. So actually, the Rhee was very dependent on US aid. So with limited domestic savings and investment resources, the government relied heavily on foreign aid, especially from the US, to implement its policies, and including this policy and political goal of development of the private sector. I have realized that you cannot really see this table. It was not intentional. And actually, I submitted the paper, so maybe you can see the number from the hard copy. Actually, table 1 is supposed to show that Korea received a high level of aid from the US, and in the type of US aid was all grant, and that was actually one of very important characteristics of Korea's aid. And the nature of aid was largely humanitarian. But after the Korean War, actually, it shows that there was a significant amount of aid was also spent for the country's reconstruction efforts. So humanitarian aid was dominant, but after the war, the nature actually slightly changed from humanitarian to reconstruction. But yeah, the dominant portion was humanitarian, of course. So specifically then, how did aid contribute to the rise of local businesses during the RE era? In the paper, I tried to show the key mechanisms of how aid worked to develop local private sector. The first mechanism that was very important was that when the Korean government received aid, which was finished product mostly from the US, it sold these aid goods to local business people at a far under market prices. So local firms utilized the goods to expand their businesses. So actually, thanks mainly to these kind of aid goods and mechanisms, so-called three-white industry emerged as the major industrial sector during the 1950s and into the 1960s. So this was the beginning of Korea's industrialization. Three-white industry refers to milling, sugar manufacturing, and textile industries because they're all white, actually. And the other important mechanism was the utilization of the Counterpart Fund. The Counterpart Fund was accrued by selling these aid goods to local business people. So the government made money by selling these aid goods, and they made an account under the Bank of Korea, and this was called the Counterpart Fund. So this was actually a fund made by foreign aid. And table 2 actually shows a summary of this Counterpart Fund. And you can see that about 1/2 of the fund was used for direct military support. And it also shows that a large proportion of the fund was used for transportation, agricultural natural resources, and health and sanitation. Transportation included highways, railways, road, harbor improvement, ship operation, and air transportation. As I mentioned earlier, the Korean government focused mostly on reconstruction after the war. So they spent a lot of aid money to rebuild the country. So this Counterpart Fund for transportation sector was managed by the Office of National Construction and Ministry of Transportation under the re-government, and they made contracts with various local construction companies. Indeed, during and after the war, a group of construction companies, including Hyundai, that you might know, emerged and further expanded their businesses by participating in these national reconstruction projects funded by foreign aid. Indeed, the RE also utilized this Counterpart Fund to develop the local manufacturing sector by providing loans to various local companies. So this, according to USA database, between 1954 and 1961, a total of about 83 billion won from the Counterpart Fund was extended as loans for various industrial projects implemented by Korean firms. So during this period of time, the manufacturing sectors that the government supported for local firms included sectors like textile, fertilizer, and chemicals. So these very cheap public loans were extended directly to numerous local private firms. So this table shows that major projects funded by this Counterpart aid loans, and you can see the familiar name like Samsung, and also LG. So these today's major firms actually began their businesses, and they could expand their business during this very early period of time, and they got very much support from the government, and the government utilized actively the aid fund to support these local firms. Clearly, besides this government support, and I know that you have this problem of corruption, even today, in business-government relations. So, of course, there are other factors like entrepreneurship of individual local businessmen played a role in this rise of early Korean entrepreneurs. But I propose that without governmental support and foreign aid, such rapid growth of the local private sector during this very early and unstable period of Korea would have been highly unlikely. Moving on to Park regime, which is widely known that as a high period of development state, and this was the time when Korea experienced very fast economic growth. Importantly, in terms of Korea's business, this was the period when Korean economy began to transform into chaebol dominance. So, for instance, today the chaebol accounts for, I don't have a very specific number, but a significant portion of Korea's GNP. So it's like a chaebol kingdom. In fact, this Park government and Korean business firms made a kind of development partnership, if we say in good way. And it worked like this. The government developed various kinds of national development plans. And I know that many developing countries also have these national development plans. But the difficulty lies in the implementation level. So we have these plans, but oftentimes the plan doesn't carry out because of many reasons. In the case of Korea, chaebol was kind of implementation agency. So government provided these plans and chaebol actually implemented these plans. So in this sense, I think there was a kind of development partnership between government and state. Hopefully that's not mine. Okay. So in other words, these Korean big business groups participated in national development movement of the Park region as a key implementation agency, and that's why they got into this chaebol, very big businesses, by participating in this government economic movement. And like his predecessor, Park, okay, I think I don't have this slide. Predecessor, Park needed support from local businesses for political reasons. He had very low level of political legitimacy, as you might all know, that Park came to power through an illegal military coup. So it was very important for him to be successful in this economic development to enhance his political legitimacy. So Park's pro-chaebol policy was largely attributable to such political as well as economic motivation. And again, like Park utilized aid funds to implement various government policies, including development of chaebol. And in this period of time, there were some notable changes in aid regime in Korea. So before Park, during as I mentioned, Korea was heavily dependent on U.S. aid, and U.S. kind of stopped providing aid by the late 1950s. So from the Park period, actually, Korea received a lot of aid from Japan, and it was mainly loan type. This table shows that as of September 30th, 1975, about 39% of total foreign loans was in the form of public loans. So Korean economy was called loan economy at the time because it was dependent on private and also public loans. As you can see from the table, that a lot of loans were actually invested in the social overhead capital sector as well as the manufacturing sector. So as of 1975, a total of 750 local enterprises received loans, and 182 of them received public loans. In other words, like Park government actually used aid loans to provide very cheap public loans to various local business groups. Also, during the Park era, ODA actually loans were used to enhance financial power of the Park government. As you can see from this table, throughout the Park era, the Counterpart Fund was used to finance public administration together with military support. Indeed, the Park government carried out a series of financial reforms to centralize financial power, and aid was actively used to meet this goal. So Park needed financial power to support the local businesses. So this table shows that Park utilized much of the fund to support the local private sector. So in some, foreign aid during the Park period played a role, I highlight, in the expansion of the local private sector, first by financing various national development projects in which local firms, mainly chaebols, participated as implementation agency. In addition, I showed that aid played an indirect and positive role in the expansion of local businesses here by supporting financial centralization of the park government, so the latter could provide cheap public loans to Korean firms. So to conclude, this paper has challenged the existing neoclassical perspective on the role of aid in development of local private sector, which has been largely limited to improving investment climate rather than building the market or the local private sector itself. Through a case of Korea, I have showed that aid played more positive and active role in development of local private sector. Importantly, this study has highlighted, actually not challenged, the role of the state, specifically the existence of state-business partnership and strong ownership of partner government as critical factors, explaining effective use of aid resources for local development. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks for all of the four presenters for keeping time. So I'd like to invite them in front before we have the discussion this point. So we have two discussants. First one is Sato Budia Toro. Change it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Juji Anna. And we have the Dr. Park Ji-yeon. So please come forward first.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity for me to be discussing this afternoon. The theme of this panel is essentially very interesting because it discusses the actors, the role of the actors, which is become very critical key variables as well as killing variables too for the development. And I'm very happy that in this session, the all presenters' paper are very well presented, and I really appreciated that. For the first paper, which talking about the role of semi-official community-based organization in social development, I have a comment and a question to be discussed. Based on my observation in the case of our country, semi-official CBO is actually not purely independent from state politically interest. And the success of the CBO is contributing to the development and very much depend on the political contextual. For example, for Indonesian case, in our second President Suharto era, the era of authoritarian, the semi-official community-based organization like Posyandu, you have told us, the author has told about the Posyandu too. It's also same with the PKK. It is an instrumental that used and abused to win the main party at the time, because the elites of the PKK is all the wives of the elites, and PKK is a hand extension of the political power. So the main agenda is actually not merely for the development, but also for the purposes of political practices. Even though in the era of the Reformation is also for political process, and it doesn't change. And even worse, since the political, so I think I doubt on the effectiveness of this kind of CBO. I admit that some of them are good and succeed, but much more is failed in carrying out the mission of encouraging development. So I'd like to know more on this point of view. In the case of Japan, probably the author can share on this issue. For the second paper, from Dr. Swati King, unfortunately, I found it actually didn't address the implication of the trend of the CSO commercialization on the inequality and poverty, which I actually expected. And I actually like to know how then the form of local CSO's legal entity after transforming into commercial. And in the case of Indonesia, actually our local CSO or NGO normally incorporated as a non-profit organization in the form of a foundation or association. So in transforming to commercial businesses, there is an experimental breakthrough from several local NGOs organizations that choose to incorporate limited liability companies, a form of business-driven entity, as an alternative strategy for strengthening the institutional capacity. But the problem faces is the difficulty of the work culture of human resources. They are too familiar with the culture of the NGO community, so it makes the business hard to sustain. Another case is that they're hard to maintain a balance between the two businesses. Some of them are then more strong in businesses and weaken and even fade away the spirit of community services as their main businesses. So I would like to know how to deal with this issue based on experience in Cambodia. And last but not least, still I really wonder whether the trend of CSO commercializations would have impact to inequality and poverty issues. Okay. For the third paper, I think there is a critical issues that need to be addressed in the paper for Dr. Phu Ngoc Binh. This is concerning the title of the paper that related to the issue of inequality, and I found it that the author doesn't specifically talking the role of all authors in handling inequality and how they are related each others. Thus, I think the paper still need to be developed with a detailed explanation of the innovation and program of each actors in terms of inequality issues. Talking about inequality, basically I have read the data from World Bank on how Vietnam has very good performance in reducing the poverty rate. Vietnam has the high elasticity of poverty to growth. Probably the author is also know that. So I'd like to know whether the inequality in Vietnam is low because of that. And I'd also like to know to what extent is the role of state and non-state in Vietnam to high elasticity of poverty to growth. The further issue that is addressed in the paper is concerned with the evaluation of initiative undertaken primarily by non-state actors. Probably the authors can share on how we measure the extent of non-state actors' contribution to, for example, the achievement of SDGs for each goals. Perhaps the presenter can give a view on this issue. Is there any tools that can be used to evaluate or measure the contribution? The other missing thing that has not been discussed in the paper is other non-states such as philanthropists or indigenous people or community-based organization. Probably the author could elaborate on this kind of non-state actors' role. For the fourth paper, I have some questions to be discussed. First, in your view, how unequal is actually the income distribution in Korea at the moment, and to what extent that the Korean development process explained may have contributed to this level of inequality. The second, I'd also eager to know how the donor, state, private sector interplay within the history of Korean economic development fit in the context of Acemoglu and Robinson's 2012 language of inclusive and extractive economic and political institutions. I think the presence of cables indicates strong level of institution which is not successful model of development based on those writers. How can we explain this anomaly? And finally, in my point of view, Korean success story seems not to support in favor of conditionality of foreign assistance to troubled countries like Greece, African countries, and probably a country like Indonesia. I mean, the situation and conditionality of foreign aids in Korean history is indeed very different compared to the countries I mentioned before. Do you agree with my statement? I think that's all for now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for critical questions and the comment. Rather than having responses to the first discussion, we'd better have the second one, and we can have all together. Dr. Park from Korea, Exim Bank.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jiyeon Park from the Export-Import Bank of Korea. First of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting me this wonderful seminar, especially this panel to discuss emerging actors for sustainable development here in very classical place, Bandung. As we all know, emerging actors matters are very important issues to achieve UN Sustainable Development Goals. Actually, in terms of Goal 17, UN mentions that a stronger commitment to partnership and cooperation is needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. That effort will require coherent policies, an enabling environment for sustainable development at all levels and by all actors. Who are the all actors? From all outstanding scholars here in this panel, they analyze who is going to be a powerful emerging actor for sustainable development in each area. Semi-official community from Dr. Hitoshi and commercialized non-profit sectors from Dr. Soshi. It seems those actors are very innovative and useful. I totally agree with two outstanding speakers today. However, I also would like to emphasize that classical actors are still very crucial for sustainable development in this world. As Professor Kim said, state actors should be one of main actors to set up a strong partnership among emerging actors for sustainable development. Especially in terms of inequality issues, there should be states as main actors. That is because inequality basically comes from a state or a group of states, the international communities. Therefore, we need to focus still on states' activities. Actually, this is what I want to comment for this panel, and I have three simple questions to scholars here. In terms of Dr. Hiroshi's presentation, it was so impressive how semi-official successfully worked at that time in Japan, just same as like our history in Korea. I just wonder, actually we are with huge size of projects, development project at this moment with various partners, which is totally different environment from your history in Japan. So do you think it could successfully work at this moment? Actually, you explain about your experience, like humanitarian aid, like you explain about your cases, but I wonder, like, based on your idea, like what sectors and what kind of projects or what kind of actors can apply this kind of projects successfully? And also simple questions to Dr. King, Sosi. I wonder how commercialized non-profit sectors work with state actors. Like, do they got fund from the government? If they got some kind of support from the government, then how the states handle the normal market? I mean, for example, tourism. If there is commercialized non-profit company and just normal tourism company and they like compete freely, then what happens? I just wonder about that kind of mechanisms, how they successfully like operate each other. And third one, I have a question to Professor Kim. Just wonder, like a Korean style development based on neoclassical approach, is that just for Korean story? Is that just suitable for Korea? Actually, at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned about Africa. So if you have some examples can compare to Korean case, like you can explain about Africa or whatever, like Asian countries that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think the questions are evenly distributed equally, more or less. So we can begin with the first presenter, the Dr. Hiroshi.
Okay. Well, I try to be quick as possible, but before replying that the commentator, I forgot to reply some of the previous questions. Okay, first of all, that the study about the livelihood improvement of Semaul-Undon, I think in Japan we did some study on livelihood improvement. In Korea, they're doing some study on Semaul-Undon, but it's very difficult to compare because I found out that there are many the trainee from Africa, and once they come to Japan under the sponsorship of JICA, they are learn about the livelihood improvement. And then the same person may have another chance to go to Korea, and they will learn about Semaul-Undon. And then that same person may be invited to China, and then they already teach something called Chinese experience. And then each of us said, oh, this is unique Japanese, this is unique Korean, this is unique Chinese. But for them, same, almost same. So that's what my feeling coming study, that if this seems same, we should prepare and combine and the comparative study, what is the difference and what is the in common thing about East Asia. Then we can jointly present it to African people or some other countries' people that's easier for them to understand and easier to absorb. So that's what I want to do that. Second, you mentioned about the participatory development process about it. Okay, we cannot say that this is a change of the philosophy about the rural development in Japan. Well, we started from the rural development from the beginning, but this is a kind of the influence of United States kind of idealism about democratization. But during the process of the domestication, we are building up a kind of participatory development style in Japan before the Robert Chambers started saying participatory development. But when we came to the stage of 1970s, 80s, our rural situation changed. The agriculture is no more the main industry. And the people are now leaving to, especially younger generation, leaving to the cities. So the agriculture is minor industry, and then the community development itself, it's okay now, it's enough food, enough house, enough clothing. So they're changing their target to more income. Then the private sector and market mechanisms getting into, so that this kind of the participatory development is become less important. That is the process how it changed. Now come to the comments. First of all, yes, I know the Post-Yandu is politicized. And even Japan, the LIP group, sometimes it's politicized by Liberal Developing Party, but unlike Women's Association is must, though the rural people should participate. But this LIP group is not must. If they don't want, they cannot, they are free to resign. That is a point. So if the activity is politicized, the people choose that to withdraw. So then in this way, we can avoid the politicizing the apparatus, but because if they are too much politicized, nobody can come. That is the process to avoid the politicization. But the important thing is that it should not be fully integrated in the government apparatus, but at the same time, the government, the extension workers, the frontline workers should be keep in touch with this group. That is the point. The second question, the comments about that, the time is different. Well, when we are developing countries, there was no international NGO. And then, so it's rather isolated, and the government can do whatever it is. But now, it's true that a lot of NGOs, the government apparatus, is trying to participatory development and the civil-based CBOs. But my feeling is that each NGO, each donor want to be organized those CBOs democratically and by their own rule. So if there are 3 donors there for one, well, the rural area in Cambodia, there's a health NGO here, there's the education NGO here, there's a nutrition NGO here. So those 3 NGOs want to make 3 different groups, but the members are almost same. But according to those line, they should be democratic, and then that should be in line with those donors' the regulation. But if we allow those groups can do as a multifunctional group, and then the governance should be according to their own way. That could be a way to avoid this verticalization. But to do that, we need more study about how those semi-official CBO can be function. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we move on to Dr. King.
Hello. Thank you so much to Zuziana and Ji-Yun Park for the critical comments. This is what I was expecting from level of discussion at this kind of meeting. So I'm grateful for the attention to my presentation and the paper. So basically, there's 2 main questions, each of which from the discussions. To Zuzi, you're questioning the roles of these non-state actors contributing to poverty and inequality reduction. So my short answer is that it is not the intention or scope, within the intention or scope of my research, which was based on my doctoral research 4 or 5 years ago, to look on specifically into this. But if I may provide a bit longer answer, that not based on empirical evidence, but based on theoretical assumption of the roles of social entrepreneurial organizations, I have 2 points. First, if you look at poverty, poverty has been remarkably reduced from around 50% in 2007 to around 13%, a decade later. So that's remarkable. But that's the first layer. If you look at more extreme poverty, there's still a lot of people living close to poverty line. But anyway, if you look at how NGOs have played a role, as I mentioned in the context in this overall development process, I think that's quite significant, but not close or direct correlation. Second, or again, this is assumption, but based on theoretical evidence. The rise of social enterprise can be explained at least by 3 failures. So first we have the government failure. The government theoretically target the medium voters. So who are left behind, all the speakers have talked already, the indigenous people, women, those in the remote areas. Second, is the failure of the market. They are not willing to work with the poor because it's not usually profitable. And through this process, especially with foreign direct investors, there has been a lot of negative externality, environmental issue, for example. And second, NGOs that international development partner has invested and dependent so much as the new non-state actor to contribute to Cambodia's development has kind of failed as well. and it's not unique to Cambodia. It's a shame, but this development issue has been repeated all over the world. Why have they failed? Because first, it doesn't represent the Cambodian people. It is established in response to availability of funding and donors' agenda. Sometimes it is established in responding to local ability of fund to bid for government contract for development projects. And the intention of creating indigenous groups of civil society also fail because it lacks membership, constituency, voluntarism. And instead, those that are motivated to work in the NGO sector are attracted by monetary incentive, not through philanthropy, not through extrinsic or intrinsic motivation. So all these issues signify the three major failures of three key actors: the state, the private sector, and the NGO. So theoretically, this is the explanation of the rise of social enterprise, a new hybrid form organization that try to address the failures of the existing models or structure of development. Second question by Chi-Hon Park. Very quickly, please. Thank you. So you were asking about the role of the state in reducing, similar to previous one, but from different angle. The role of the state, and this is a very good question. And if I may, I want to link this to Chi Yong Kim's presentation, because while she was presenting, I kind of reflect to my case, Cambodia's case, because in the case of Korea, development aid from America seem to have positive effects on Korea. And I think, if I recall correctly, and to reflect the difference between Cambodia and Korea is the role of the state. And therefore, it is called developmental state. The role of the state and the context vary so much. In contrast, the state institution in Cambodia is almost lacking. Very weak state. No state role. And there's a lot of study that point out that, you know, the government and other important actors leave all the important decision agenda until the last few years to foreign actors because of issue of lack of resources and capacity. So whatever foreign donors and advisors design or wants to do, wherever they want to do, they have freedom to do that. So that's the difference between lack of ownership and more ownership in terms of government project. And how commercialized NGOs work or their relationship with the government. This is, I don't have strong evidence in this, but there are a few anecdotal cases that because there's no legal framework for social enterprise, although theoretically organization would be called social enterprise, but they are registered normally as an NGO, and they negotiate with the local authority through personal relationship for tax reduction. Of course, there's raising question about competition between the normal business agency that pay proper tax. But my counter argument would be that these social enterprises target or work with the poor or those at the bottom of the pyramid, and not a regular enterprise that try to maximize profit. And then there are social enterprises that want to be a business proper, that has a long-term sustainability focus, and they would be registered as a proper business and pay proper tax. But the intention is the same. They try to solve a social problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. Frankly speaking, in Vietnam, there's a little information or documentation about aid, foreign aid, or international aid. If it is, even a little money has to be cleared by the government, a little money, a small project. So different from Cambodia, Vietnam has very strong control of foreign aid, for international aid. So any activity, not to say, or including documentation, assessment, criticism has to be cleared by the government first. And even by the World Bank and by the UN and by the embassies in Hanoi. So it has to be, it like to clear, to control all this. So that's why you have a little information about NGO. And in Vietnam, we are not allowed to use the word NGO. Of course, we can use formally, but normally in in papers, in document, the word NGO is not used. The word civil society is not used. So social organization is the word to be used. Yeah. So that's why you say about the document or criticizing the government or mentioning the state achievement, etc. So if it is to praise the government, it's okay. But if to criticize, it's not okay. Not to be published. So that is the fact. So that's why we don't have a document. I think the first time I saw only from Oxfam about inequality in Vietnam. Oxfam only the first one I have seen, but not from the government, not from other organizations. Thank you. And even in Vietnam, we don't use the word indigenous population, but ethnic minorities. So like a China, ethnic minority is used, not indigenous population. So we have certain kind of wordings, considered to be sensitive, not to be used official document, for example. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then the Professor Kim from Korea. So could you?
Okay, thank you for the comment, and I'll try to answer not all of them, but I think two major points. About questions, the question about income distribution, actually this was not my, the direct topic of the paper itself, but as far as I know, maybe my Korean colleagues have better ideas and actually exact figures, but as far as I know, Korean economy actually has some characteristics, and relatively low level of inequality was one of Korea's characteristics of Korean political economy. So the level of inequality was relatively limited, at least before the breakout of the crisis, financial crisis in the late 1990s. Since then, today, Korea's inequality problem has become more an issue than before. But even today, as far as I know, I think Korea's unemployment level is around 4%. So it's not that high. And I think one of the contributing factor could be the development of the local private sector. Of course, the labor environment was terrible in the 60s and 70s, but unemployment level was very low. So people were earning. So maybe the local, actually, private firms played a role in this low level of income inequality and distribution in Korea. About aid conditionality, yes. And I think we have to be careful in expanding and generalizing the case of Korea in terms of impact of aid on development of recipient countries' economy. It was very different historical context. So when Korea was receiving aid a lot from the US, the model for the US government was actually the Marshall Plan. So it was before the rise of whole neoclassical view, before the rise of aid conditionality, IMF and the World Bank. So the Korean case cannot really tell anything about the effectiveness of aid conditionality if you mean by structural assistance program. But based on my other studies, which is about African cases, I can say that the conditionality has not been that successful in many countries in Africa. So they've been under SAPs for decades, and there was very few cases where this SAP actually led to the sustainable development. And about state intervention and the generalization of Korean case, actually, Dr. Park asked this question. In my literature review part, I referred to existing studies which talked about the importance of state-business partnership. And these cases are widespread. It's not just Asian countries, but increasingly comparative studies actually highlighted the importance of the state-business kind of cooperation in leading economic development. But I haven't seen any study that linked this foreign aid to this state-business the factor. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have, it is now a few minutes past 4, but I think there must be some people from the floor who wants to ask questions.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation for all four presenters. I would like very much, especially Pak Sato, Pak Sato, on the CBO, community-based organization, and your idea is very important, how to do sort of a comparative study, the CBO, various countries, lessons learned, what are the key factors that CBO in this country more successful, and so on and so forth. And also related that to the effect of the changes in the political landscape, or system, democratic country, as well as decentralization, especially in the case of Indonesia. Those two factors that change significantly the development landscape. So it would be very much of interest to do that kind of comparative study. And secondly, I will also notice a lot of the discussion centered on the lessons learned from the eight how do you say it, eight development assistance, in various countries, in Cambodia, in Korea itself, which apparently also they have undergone quite a different experience, in how aid program itself has transformed the economy of Korea in one example, whereas in Cambodia, in Vietnam, quite different experience. Indonesia also, and also of late the conditionalities that are attached to various aid, and also actually globally there is change in the paradigm of aid, from aid to partnership, so global partnership. Maybe if there is also some, I don't know, comparative study or some sort of that, so CBO and lessons learned from aid to partnership in development. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's get questions together and then get a response to Ian.
Yes, along the very same lines as Amida, I think the implicit invitation from both Sato and Ji-young is to compare what you've described in a particular set of historical circumstances to what might apply in a different set of countries in a different time. And it's really, I mean, it's just fascinating to think about, right? I mean, you didn't even talk about land reform in Japan, but that's, of course, the context in which all of the activities you described are taking place. Big deal, right? I want to make, on these lines, I think we can talk about this a lot, but I want to make an observation, I guess, based on something you said just in passing on this point, and that is that the investment in education that took place in Korea from the 1950s, in South Korea, from the 1950s through the 1970s was huge. It was unprecedented in the developing world, in a very, very poor country, as you pointed out. And of course, my colleagues in Vietnam and elsewhere love to look at Korea and say, we need to be like Korea, right? We've got to do what Korea did. Make all the kids go to school and we'll be rich, just like the Koreans. Problem. Big problem. That was taking place pre-globalization. And so the structure of the Korean economy was entirely internally oriented, and you had high-skilled industries growing up because they had no competition from outside. And so as the economy grew, there were lots and lots of good jobs opening up for kids who finished school. And in that particular way, the Korean model, while fascinating as history, has very little applicability in a globalized world. That's just an example.
And last, me.
I have two questions. First, this just curiosity. My question to Dr. Bin. So in Vietnam, a lot of Vietnamese women first go to Japan and Taiwan, now Korea, and then now China just observed the whole young female population as a wife from your country. So what's going to happen to your man in your country? Okay? All right, and so one. Second, now the China is like a global manufacturing place. Now it's a China global soaking up wife country. I don't know why. So what's going to happen? And then next question is, so as a result of this, we're talking about today is the inequalities about this, but because of this new global trends like international marriage migrant, what do you think is any inequality issues will rise, particularly in rural area? That's my question for you. And then another question is for Dr. Hiroshi. Fascinating. I really didn't know about this, and I'm so fascinated because this is area also I'm very finding interesting. But you're saying the more democratic this movement in that 1950, 40, and 50 period. So more women are more empowered, it's more democratization and all that. Now you are more industrialized, and then it sounds like women are less empowered, so like de-empowered, so to speak. Because now, as you can see in the global ranking of women's empowerment, Japan, as of 2016, Japan ranks 111th out of 180 countries. And Korea is 116. So Korea and Japan, we really, really similar in many ways, especially like that. And so you're talking about empowerment of women, but actually Japanese women not really empowered. And the political empowerment is worse than as of 2016. You are 113. Korea is, yay, finally we beat you. Okay, we are not 92. Okay, so we are better than Japan just for temporarily, I guess. Okay, and so what? So what's happening? So are you saying that this democratic movement in 1940s was women are more empowered, and then your trends now, especially nowadays in Japan, women are really de-empowered? My question.
Okay, so now, I'm sorry. We have a plenty of time. Let me begin with, do you want? Yeah, so be quick, please.
Oh, very quick. Thank you for your question. Yes, I get this question about applicability of Korean model to other cases a lot, and I agree totally with you that the context matters. So if we want to try to explain the social phenomena, I think we have to see both the context and actors. The Korean case actually, as you briefly mentioned, that there was very special geopolitical context, that the US provided aid because of the strategic importance of Korea, and actually at that time that there was no global competition in terms of global market. Yes, so that was very important contextual factors. But still, I think Korean case has some lessons, which is more about the role of actors. And that could be state that I have emphasized in this paper and in my other studies. But actually, this is related to your second question, which is about education. And actually, one of my other projects, which is ongoing project, is about the comparative study of the Philippines and Korea. And the interesting data that I found that in terms of economic level in the 1960s, by the early 1960s, the Philippine economy was doing much better than the Korean economy, and many expected the Philippines to become a faster growing economy than South Korea. But these data provided by Adelman and Morris, maybe some of you noticed, indicated that Korea has more potential because of this relatively high level of social development, which includes the education level. So Korea was behind in many other factors than the Philippines, but in terms of the social development, Korea was doing better. So they assessed that Korea has more potential to become more successful. And I think they came to be right. They turned out to be right. So now my focus is actually moving from the state to society. Because if we explain this high level of investment, yes, there was the government, but without the participation of people, society, you cannot really explain this really high level of educational level when Korea was doing very poor in terms of economy. So that's my crazy thoughts.
Yes. In Vietnam, we have some millions of young people, some million men, who will be unable to get married in the next 10 years, some million. I know that in China, there will be more, 10 times higher than Vietnam. So because there are men who are unable to get married, So that is the truth. Yeah, thank you.
No solution.
I mean, yes, numbers obviously is not hard to imagine. What happened?
Okay, so since our time is limited, thank you very much, Ian and Armida, that those things should be considered for the comparative study. About the Yumi's question, yes. Well, what happened is the women's status became voiceless to voice raising. That is a part of empowerment. After that, true, but in the 1960s, 70s, the rural area became the more modernized, and the men move out to the agriculture sector. So in the agriculture sector, women is now dominating. So in that sense, the decision making of agriculture is more on women. But in the total system of Japanese society, well, true, it's not to such the degree. That is the situation.
Thank you very much, and I feel sorry for some of you who wants to ask some questions, but we better stop here. One of the reasons is I have a good reputation in time management. I feel it is damaged today, so we better, for some reason, I may tell you later. Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
Okay, some announcement. We actually have plenty of time to go to early dinner, so just maybe we can have a break before we leave. And there is some administration. I think some of you have some, finalized some.